Okay. Hi. Thanks for joining us tonight for this chat, and huge thanks and congrats to Paisley Book Festival for a fantastic program so far. I'm Siân McIntyre, and I've been employed by the Edwin Morgan Trust as the project manager for the Edwin Morgan Centenary. I'm really lucky that in this position, I've had the opportunity to work with 22 really inspiring creatives to develop 20 works as a part of our grant scheme called The Second Life, which was supported by Creative Scotland, the Saltire Society, and the Edwin Morgan Trust. So tonight we're going to meet 3 of those 22 artists who are commissioned as a part of the Second Life grant scheme and hear about their processes of discovery and response to the life and work of celebrated and much loved poet Edwin Morgan. So the Trust has been keen to use this centenary as an opportunity to explore the many facets of Morgan's oeuvre, including his brilliant translations, his life as a queer poet, and of course, his visually stunning collages, which are held at the University of Glasgow Archive. So the Second Life grant scheme was conceived as a way to bring new voices to respond to Edwin Morgan's life and work. To ensure that new perspectives were being explored, we formed a cultural advisory group to represent a range of geographical locations and also a range of communities and lived experiences. This group included Hannah Lavery from Scottish Poetry Library, who is a poet and a playwright, Ian Morrison from Fruit Market Gallery, who's also a poet, Robert Softly Gale and Mary Taylor from Birds of Paradise Theatre, Owen Dara from DCA, and Shona McClintock, who's producer of Gaelic and Traditional Arts at Eden Court. These advisors were hugely generous with their time and knowledge and nominated recipients for our first round of grants, which Vlad and Sekai received, and also shortlisted the applications from our second round, which was an open call, which Sasha is here from. So to introduce these 3 amazing people who have spent the last 6 months exploring and delving into Edwin Morgan's work and responding through their own language. So we've got Sekai Machache, who is a visual artist and curator based between Glasgow and Dundee. Her work is a deep interrogation of the notion of self. She is interested in the relationship between spirituality, imagination, and the role of the artist in disseminating symbolic imagery to provide a space for healing. Sekai works with a wide range of media, including performance and photography. We've also got Sasha Sabin Callaghan, who is a writer and digital artist living on the east coast of Scotland. She was a winner of the 2016 A Public Space Emerging Writer Fellowship and the 2019 Pen to Paper Awards. Her illustrations have featured in a wide range of exhibitions, journals, and magazines, and Sasha's lived experience of disability and impairment is a major influence on her work. Vlad Butucha is a Glasgow-based Romanian-born writer and academic, formerly mentored by the Playwright Studio Scotland. Vlad made his professional debut writing a one part of the National Theatre of Scotland sci-fi trilogy Interference, and his new play Silkworm is set to premiere in the 2021 Edinburgh Festival Fringe. Vlad's work explores a variety of themes, including digital culture, politics, and ecology, often through the prism of queer sexuality and thinking. So these 3 impressive people, we're going to start with, I guess, the most obvious and juicy kind of question. I know that not all of you, and maybe none of you, were immediately familiar with Morgan's work when prior to this grant happening and prior to you being asked to respond to Edwin Morgan. And I was hoping that you might be able to individually take me through what the process of discovery was for you, maybe your initial reactions to the grant, your initial reactions to Morgan, maybe your historical interactions with Morgan, and then how over the past 6 or 7 months you've explored him and generated new work in response. Should I tell you who goes first? Sasha, you're the first on my left.
Okay, goodness. Well, yes, confession time. I knew very little about Edwin Morgan. He wasn't on the curriculum when I was at school, which says an awful lot about school rather than Edwin Morgan, I think. And the commission really kind of opened up my knowledge of him. This year, during the pandemic. I think, like a lot of other people, I've actually found it really difficult to actually read. This is yet another confession. I just find myself doom scrolling. And I just thought, no, if this commission is about Edwin Morgan's poetry, we might as well forget it. And then I saw the scrapbooks, and I was just like, these amazing, absolutely amazing scrapbooks. They just opened a complete new world. And for anybody that hasn't encountered them, they are the most amazing treasure trove. And I was just like, these are wonderful. They're just wonderful. And they really kind of inspired me to actually apply for a commission and try and create something that did Edwin Morgan justice.
Thank you. I should say Sasha's created a video that is in response to Morgan's scrapbooks, and that video is up on our website now. And the video is an invitation for, well, you can tell us, Sasha.
Yeah, well, it's all very intriguing. I mean, the scrapbooks themselves, you know, there's lots and lots of stuff. I think it's 54,000 different images and pieces of text, more than 3,000 pages. But quite tantalizingly, the very last scrapbook, scrapbook 16, is unfinished. And this was the thing that I think really got me thinking about where I wanted this commission to go. And the next stage of it is to actually issue an open call to disabled people, disabled artists and creatives, or just anybody that's interested, to actually create collages that would fill that 16th volume and actually complete it. So from the reaction that we've had already, there's a real resonance, and I think this is going to be a really exciting end to the project. I'm just loving it. It's brilliant.
Oh, so great. And I guess moving on from this idea of digital and people engaging and reimagining, Vlad, you've already unmuted yourself. I like how you're already noticing that segue. If you would be able to introduce your experience of discovery with Morgan and your project, that would be great.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, confession time for me as well. I knew nothing about Edwin Morgan before this. I think I probably knew the name. And I remember having the first phone call with Siân and me trying to kind of play up a bit that I actually knew something, which, confession time, I didn't really that much. But I think that was really good. And I think for me, the fact that this commission sort of allowed me to become sort of intimate with the work of such a great poet that I've discovered in Edwin Morgan was very valuable, you know. And in the beginning, you know, I just had the luxury to have time to read this fascinating body of work. And, you know, quite early, my expectations of what Edwin Morgan would be were kind of challenged, because I didn't really expect to see this kind of playful and ironic and queer and challenging and also accessible work. So it was quite a beautiful journey of discovery, just kind of spending time to read in the beginning. And I remember, and I wrote this down, I remember something that really stuck with me and resonated was from a fragment of a poem called Copernicus that he wrote, I believe, as part of a larger series called Planet Wave. And he describes Copernicus as, no stories are told about this man who kicked the earth from its false throne. So I love this idea of kicking the earth from its false throne, the kind of metaphor of challenging the central and dominant representations that we have, the kind of dominant ways in which we conceptualize our humanity. And that kind of made me read his work in a completely different lens. You know, it made me better understand his queer work, for example. It made me better understand his non-human languages, you know, like in the Loch Ness Monster song, where he creates this non-human language precisely to challenge language as dominantly human form of representation. So this was just kind of my beginning of it, and part of my research that I work on at the moment has to do a lot with technologies in theater and performance, and how interactions between humans and performance may work to destabilize these dominant representations of what a human is. So from there, you know, I obviously discovered Morgan's computer poems, you know, where he gives a language to these machines, a language that is other than English. And I think it's other than English in a very political way, because I think he maybe tries to challenge the sort of dominance of English, and perhaps also, you know, other dominant representations that come with it. So I read his computer poems within this kind of queering of language framework, in the kind of challenging the way we normally speak, the way we normally express ourselves. And then I found out that despite all of his computer poems, it turns out he never even had a computer. So I thought this is where I kind of come in. So my project is basically neural network algorithm that I train to learn Edwin Morgan's work. So I gave it a big database of a lot of Morgan's poems and a lot of his translations, some of his theater, and I got this algorithm to learn his style of doing work. And then I got the algorithm to generate poems of its own in the sort of style of Edwin Morgan, but also not quite Edwin Morgan. So as you can imagine, the results vary widely from absolutely strange to terrible to some that are actually quite nice. So I guess what I'm trying to do with this is to give an artificial sort of intelligence, agency over language, to allow it to create its own way of speaking and thinking that's inspired by Morgan, but also hopefully very, very different.
Very exciting. And so this play with dominant language and non-dominant language, and also English particularly as a dominant language and as the colonizing language, there's some really interesting overlaps there with your approach, Sekai, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how you found yourself within the life and work of Edwin Morgan.
Thanks, Siân. And yeah, I basically remember learning about Edwin Morgan when I was in high school, but at the time I didn't really delve deeply into his work. But I've actually weirdly had the first lines of the Glasgow Sonnet in my head since I was a teenager, and I felt like obviously something about like his writing must have stuck with me, if like that particular like piece of writing has just sort of stayed with me. And I was invited to participate with in the Second Life Centenary project. I realised that it would be a great opportunity to find out more about his work and to really find a point of connection with it. So I've been thinking about translation, and just obviously to link in with what Vlad was talking about there, and how this was such an integral part of Edwin Morgan's practice as a writer, and thinking about all of the cumulative practices that creative people often pick up within their work. So, for example, if I want to do some sound work, then I learn sound editing. If I want to work in film, then I learn to edit video. I've always worked like that, and that's why I would consider my practice multidisciplinary. I like to acquire new skills as I make new work, and this requires spending time working on developing this new skill to work on the project, but it can be really rewarding in the end because it allows me to sort of have new skills to bring to future work as well. So when I started thinking about how to respond to Edwin Morgan's work, I thought a lot about language and how he uses language to creatively give a sense of place or a sense of pace. For example, in his poem In the Snack Bar, where he describes meeting an elderly man in a snack bar and helping him to go to the toilet, and the pace of the poem sort of forces the reader to slow down, and the pace of the reading, especially when you're reading it aloud. So I've been trying to read a lot of Morgan's poems aloud, and that has really helped me to get a feel for his work and how it plays with language and form. Of course, some of his more unconventional poems, like the concrete poetry or his instamatic poems, that obviously speak to me as a photographer, are almost impossible to read aloud, and I like that about them. They feel like they're more about using language to form an image than to relay an idea. So as part of the project, I've been acquiring a new skill, and it's really an old skill that I'm returning to. Basically, I've been learning to speak Shona, which is my mother tongue, and the language that I said my first words in. It's a slow and challenging process, but I'm finding that I'm picking it up fairly quickly, as I've always been able to kind of understand it. And as someone who has a mixed identity with a Zimbabwean father and a Scottish mother that raised me, and having grown up in Scotland my whole life, I'm working with the languages that are related to these very different cultures, and not just the languages, but artifacts, music, imagery, and concepts. And I'm trying to just sort of weave all of that together, starting off with the writing, and then I'm going to have some of it translated into Gaelic, and also working with Scots as well. And then hopefully I'll have some stilted versions of myself trying to read things in Shona involved in it as well. I've decided to work in film because there's a kind of aspect of my photography that's always been there, which is its relationship to movement. So I'm always kind of suggesting movement in the photography pieces, which are obviously stills. And I felt like it's time to start moving into that moving image space. And I'm basically going to be telling a very non-linear, very kind of, how do I say this? A story that doesn't really form a story. It doesn't form a narrative. And similar to the poetry, some of the poetry that Edwin Morgan has written, where you're only really getting glimpses of something. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it at the moment. And I feel as if it's just an honor and a privilege to be able to engage with Morgan's work, and also to be able to share that work in this way.
Thank you. So hopefully the audience gets an idea of these three very different projects. We've got Sasha, who's engaged with the scrapbooks of Morgan and using the scrapbooks as this window to be able to think about accessible creative practice and self-expression. And then Vlad, who's using Morgan-esque sort of crazy virtual intelligence Morgan poems from beyond the grave to be able to also unpack ideas of authenticity and who has the right to speak and performance, and by generating these poems within the way that Morgan was also super interested in, but then also removed himself from. And then Sekai talking about this very holistic way of approaching Morgan's work from a number of angles that are all intrinsically connected to your own practice and your own ways of thinking in your own life. And I guess the thing that particularly with your works, but with luckily really generously a lot of the artists doing the Second Life projects have come at it with the same approach, this way of weaving your own lived experience and your own identities with Morgan's work, I've found really incredible. And I would love to hear from you about how you approach this sort of challenge to bring something that maybe isn't isn't immediately visible into something that starts to feel tender and close to you. And I guess starting from Sasha, I know that you already had a collage practice. So if you can talk to me about what window Edwin Morgan's collages is, and you've spoken so eloquently previously with me about the extent and the wildness and strangeness of Morgan's collages.
Yeah, I mean, I just to pick up on something that Vlad said before I forget about it. Yeah, the irony and the playfulness. This is a guy who was funny. I mean, I just want to kind of emphasize that Edwin Morgan was not some straight-laced, really serious person. He was, from the collages, somebody who had a really wild sense of humor. And there's a strong surrealist element in the scrapbooks. They kind of hinge on very, very uncanny happenings, bizarre coincidences. There are monsters and eclipses and lots of things about animals. And yeah, they're just a wild kind of eclectic mix. But the thing that really spoke to me was that apart from the fact that they are, in terms of a social history, they're little insulated time capsules, so that they're snapshots of experience. And I suppose that kind of echoes his instamatic poetry, just the click of the shutter, just recording 1 second of time. And I just found that incredibly interesting. But I also found the fact that they are just the strangest and most bizarre kind of collection of images and random text and just wildness. The kind of wildness that runs through it was the thing that appealed to me and was something that I wanted to kind of pick up in what I was doing. And Edwin Morgan was primarily a writer, but that writer's eye actually was the kind of magpie intellect that sort of collected all of this stuff. And for me, it was the kind of making sense of it that informed my practice, and has actually, I think in some ways, made me a bit wilder, a little bit more surreal, a bit more of a Dadaist. These are all the kinds of things that he has done for me and influenced me over the last 6 months. I don't know if that answers the question. I just feel as if I've gone on a wild kind of ramble, like the scrapbooks themselves, really. So this is what this man has done to me.
I'm interested, Sasha, in the and in the same way, I mean, with COVID, we've all ended up working virtually in this kind of digital realm, and the mode that you've chosen to engage with Morgan by using social media as a platform for people to share their work, and by using video as a way to talk to potential collaborators. What has this changed world meant for you in developing the work, but also for you as a person, for access to this audience and accessibility to the scrapbooks in and of themselves?
Right. Okay. That's a kind of quite complex set of questions, really. In terms of how I approached this project, there was always, because I work as a digital artist, there was always going to be a strong digital element to it. But how I envisaged it happening was the final stages of the project would be something that happened in real life. We would have workshops, we would do what I suppose now we look back as the kind of same old. Obviously, COVID has changed everything, and moving over to a completely digital way of working, obviously it brings its own challenges, but for many disabled people, it has opened up the world. I mean, it's a contradiction that the outside world is kind of shrinking in terms of what we can actually access during lockdown. But the digital world has actually expanded amazingly for disabled people. And there are so many more things that we can participate in now. So that's the kind of plus side of it. And probably working in this way as with the previous project that I curated, Not Going Back to Normal, we're probably going to actually reach a far greater audience than we would have done working conventionally. So that's been the plus side to it. In terms of actually being able to access the scrapbooks, well, that's had to be done online, and that's not really for me, that's not a substitute for actually seeing the real thing. So it's been a bit of a kind of hands-off experience from that point of view. But there have been big pluses to this, and actually it's been I think on the whole a positive way of working. Mind you, you've got to be doing something significantly wrong if you can't be inspired by Edwin Morgan actually to pull out anything, right? Because the absolute randomness of him, you could just choose anything and just go, oh yeah, I could work with that. This is somebody with the most amazing intellect and intelligence and humor and search for identity and just everything. I mean, what's not to like? I've been quite serious. I think I've fallen in love with him. I actually do. I think I've fallen in love with Edwin Morgan. I'm sure it would be quite
Got a lockdown love affair with Morgan.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I guess thinking about the vastness of Morgan's work and this idea of access points, Sekai, I sort of throughout this year or throughout the Second Life project, I have gone back to this quote that you gave us at the very beginning of the Second Life, which I found really poignant. And you said, as an artist of colour whose work interrogates the notion of self and belonging, it is refreshing to be invited to engage with the work of a celebrated Scottish writer whose work paints a beautiful and dynamic portrait of the country that I call home, but rarely claims me as my own. So I'm really interested to hear from you about how the Second Life grants, or how, if at all, exploring Morgan's work has encouraged that relationship between home and belonging, or not, because that was something that was really interesting to me.
Thanks. Yeah, I felt really surprised when I was invited to be part of this project, because it's in my experience, I tend to be invited to engage with projects or kind of even to be invited to be in exhibitions that are related to concepts around race and racism or gender. And I don't really get asked to just like respond to like, insert like topic very often, or specifically someone who's as celebrated as Edwin Morgan. And I felt like that was really refreshing, and I'm still really humbled to have been invited. And I sort of feel like this is how it should be. Like, artists should be invited on the merit of their practice and seeing how they might be able to bring a new perspective onto someone's work. So I think that that's what's really amazing about this whole project, that so many people from so many different backgrounds and with lots of different approaches to work in general are engaging with the same writer in his practice. And I think that, yeah, in a way, I lived in Dundee for a really, really long time, but I grew up in Glasgow. So it's even more amazing, because it's like, wow, this is like a Glaswegian hero. So I'm getting to really feel like I'm doing something with my practice that's in a way feeding back to like who I am and how I've grown up. And my sense of belonging has always been there. I've always felt like I belonged here. It's just that it's not necessarily something that's always accepted by people in this country. And it's something that I'm always talking about, always dealing with, and always kind of challenging within my practice and within the ways that I kind of move through the world. So I feel as if like that this project in a way is like solidifying my relationship to like that Scottish identity as well.
So it's super interesting the way that you're also engaging in Shona, but also in Gaelic, and thinking about the relationship between your mother tongue, but also the language of the country that you call home. would you be able to expand a little bit on that experience of working between these languages, and what commentary, because I think there's a really interesting, and Vlad, if you want to bump in with some extra questions, there's some really interesting relationships with both of you as using language as a tool to kind of question or pull apart dominant narratives generally around identity, but using language as a tool for this, which Edwin Morgan, as you said, Vlad, also did.
Yeah, I feel that's really kind of something that really attracted me to Edwin Morgan from the very beginning, this playfulness, this challenging to language and to English as well. And I mean, obviously as a poet, he was very interested in languages with such a broad range of translation works. So I really appreciate that, you know, the fact that he really did respect other languages and did them justice through his effort of translation. I mean, myself, English is not my first language, and sometimes in my writing practice, I do bring in translations of my own from Romanian of, you know, various idioms that, you know, I then translate, for example, into English, and they're not quite English, and so forth. So I feel like I'm going away a bit from your question there. But yeah, and I think as Sekai was saying earlier, it is a great privilege, you know, that I was asked to, you know, by the way, here's one of our main poets, feel free to mess with his language in any way you see fit. I think that's a true privilege to be able to do that.
And what approach are you taking, Sakai, with blending or with inventing and experimenting with these languages?
So I have a confession to make now first, because like I haven't been able to engage yet with Gaelic, because I really set myself a monumental task when I said I was going to do this, like back in October. So I have been learning Shauna, but like I'm thinking about how I'm going to work with language as well as music, and kind of thinking about trying to find Celtic song and things like that to kind of play within the soundscape of the film that I'm making. So I'm thinking about like Gaelic will come in little small ways, but I won't be able to. I think this is something that will build into another project for the future as well. So I'm actually glad that it can be foundational in that way. But I definitely think that weaving elements of Scottish culture, Gaelic language, Shauna language, and then also elements of Scots as well, because I really love the way that like there's always still a kind of relationship to Scots in a lot of writers from Scotland's work. So it feels like it's not dead in the same way that like Gaelic and Shauna have been kind of relegated to the sidelines and marginalised. But also in my research, I was looking at a writer from Kenya called Gaika Deda. So I was just looking at my notes to make sure I don't say his name wrong. And he was talking about how it's important to have a relationship with your mother tongue. And he said that if you know all the languages of the world and you don't know your mother tongue, then it's a system of self-enslavement. And I really thought about that quite hard, about like something that I've been wanting to do for a really, really long time is to learn Shauna, but I've just always been putting it off. So I felt like this project gave me an opportunity to say like, okay, this is it. From this day forward, I'm going to start working on engaging with my language. But then also I'm not going to deny the fact that I've been raised in Scotland since I was 4 years old. My mother who raised me is Scottish. You know, she comes from an Irish Catholic background. Like there is aspects of another culture that has really been very much formative in my life. So and also a very strong part of my identity as well. So I think that yeah, there's a lot of things that are happening there. I think they're personal, but then they're also, I'm thinking about language in general and how you know, we talked about English a lot and how it kind of has colonized our language, but in another way, it has that, despite the horrible way that it's been proliferated around the world, it has that unifying aspect of it as well, because we can all be sitting here having a conversation from multiple different cultures.
And you've talked about how this project has helped or encouraged you to engage in your writing practice. And I was wondering if you might be able to talk about that and maybe even share a little bit of your writing if you feel comfortable with that.
I'd love to, but I'm like, what will I share? Because yeah, I actually have like a small piece that I might be able to read if I can find it in my notes. But yeah, I write a lot, to be honest, but I don't often share it because yeah, I used to have this thing where I would write down poems all the time when I was young, and I would just hide them. I would just put them in, like, they'd be in journals, or they'd just be in like little scrapbooks, and they would just be hidden underneath the bed and stuff. So but just before I was invited to take part in this project, I was already working towards another project called The Divine Sky that was engaging my writing a bit more. So it came at sort of the perfect time, really. And I write down my dreams a lot. So almost every day I have, like, because I have a lucid dreaming practice that's sort of really fundamental to my artistic practice. And I write my dreams in journals or in the notes on my phone. And when I write poetry, it's always in the moment of waking. So it's always like, it's always been hard for me to accept that I'm a writer or a poet, because it's like, I write out of this like inspired moment, like as I'm waking up, and I don't really then look back at that writing and edit it or think about like what it might be saying. But I have been writing recently about the pandemic a wee bit, and it might be cheesy, so I'm gonna try to see if I can find it and read it out. You really put me on the spot.
Sorry. You don't have to read. You don't have to read.
Okay, let me see if I can find it. Sorry. It's here somewhere. Okay, there. So in our enforced domesticity, there's a renegotiation of time. We awake not always in the day, dream born in chaotic bliss. We carry forth our inner impositions through the relationship we hold to the objects in our life. We are only us, the great indoors, windowsill, bedside lamp, warm carpet, dark moonlit cityscape through glass pane longing. There is no escape from all of this. Imagining a way out is futile. The country ticks on, the lived realization of those tacky posters, mugs, and flags. They repeat to us in earnest words to keep calm and carry on. Even when the whole damn thing is fallen apart, even when it's just too much of the same, even as they chip away at freedom's hard fought and won, for what? If we could walk the streets at night, hands held open, asking for more or less of what we deserve. In these moments, I just sit still, eyes closed, concentrate on my breath, and try my best not to imagine worse. A renegotiation of time, as though time was ever a real dimension, felt and not just received as instructions on a flat, round surface. The only thing that was real about it was the shadows playing. We are here in our houses, waiting. That was it. I don't know.
Amazing.
That the other day when I was waking up, and it's like, that's what I always do. I kind of like quickly type it up on my notes or write it in my journal, and then I just move on. And then like maybe a few years later, it might find its way into like a piece or a film or something. So that's, yeah, it's
I'm so glad that Morgan's been able to usher some more of that. That's so amazing. So great. I think there's a nice time to just tie back in to Vlad, the way that you're also generating new poems and new written work. Would you be able to share some of the poems that have come from your amazing virtual intelligence, artificial intelligence code monster that's been gobbling up, and just like a quick plug, it's been gobbling up the Edwin Morgan Centenary selected poems, the Edwin Morgan 20s, and here's Morgan and me also available. You can see them on our website.
Yeah, I think after Sekai's wonderful and touching writing, I think what will become very clear in the next 2 minutes is that computers will not replace human creativity. So let's get that straight from the get-go. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So the way this algorithm works is it takes a big sample of Edwin Morgan writing, and it kind of explodes it into the most basic unit, which is the letter. So it breaks up all the sentences, all the words into letters, and then it kind of gobbles and gobbles and gobbles again and again and again and again. It tries to learn it. And after a while, it becomes good at predicting the next character in a sequence. Now, it's called artificial intelligence because science people like to hype up their terminology a bit. But I don't think it's really intelligence. I think it's more of an intuition that it gets just by kind of repeating the same action thousands of times. It kind of becomes intuitive. So don't expect anything that makes a lot of sense. But I feel, at least maybe that's my reading into it, I feel that some of these results kind of intuitively feel a bit like Edwin Morgan. So I have a few examples here, and obviously the algorithm can be in different states of learning, and that will generate different results. So this is an example when the neural network trained quite well, and it's confident enough in sharing a result. So what we got is, gods have something on the sheep of the streets, on the skin of its strike, the heart, the sound of men, and the green stars. So this was trained on quite a large neural network, and the algorithm was quite confident in generating this sort of poem. Another one that I became quite fond of, it was actually one of the first ones that came out of the Centenary collection, and it's called Parry Stars. And it goes a bit like, the starless, the streams and the streets and the stars, the strange of the stone. The starless, the world of the strange, the stars and the stars. So this is a far less confident, far more abstract kind of notion. So I've been facing this conundrum because I've trained different data sets, some larger in size, some smaller in size. I've trained them with different levels of success, but after a while, it seems that this algorithm, and across different, like I've tried to really change the parameters of the experiment, but they tend to default to this obsession with stars. Now that's probably because there's a lot of words in English that start with an S, and the second letter quite often can be a consonant, quite often a T. So it's, in that sense, it makes a bit of sense that stars would be a kind of obsession of the algorithm. But in my data set, it only comes out about 80 times out of tens of thousands of words. So it's quite interesting that the algorithm has focused on this kind of universe image. And I know that I'm reading into it, and you should never read into machine learning stuff because it does have a degree of randomness that is hard to control. That's kind of the beauty of it. And I know that now I'm reading into it, but I find it quite beautiful, this kind of algorithm that identified the cosmic in Edwin Morgan and has decided, this is my end, this is what I'm talking about. It's about stars and skies and stuff like that. So yeah, these are kind of some of the results.
It's so hard not to imagine that there's some sort of force that's coming and somehow creating that. But we've got a few questions. So the first question is, do you think that, so this is to all of you, so feel free to give a short or long answer. Do you think that the artists think that this project will impact their work long term? Anything they'll take away from this project in terms of their practice? So do we want to start with Sasha and then Vlad and then Sekai?
What can I say? Yes. I think I've become an Edwin Morgan obsessive. I do see a lot of his influence bleeding into my work now. And the next commission that I'm working on, which is for the Attenborough Gallery, is to produce 6 chapbooks recording the pandemic. And I can kind of see how Edwin Morgan's work is actually going to have a major, when I say shadow over that, that's not in a negative way, but I think he'll always be there in the back of my mind now. So yeah, I think, yeah, he's here to stay for me.
And hopefully we can get you to the archive in the flesh. That will be a game changer as well.
That would be so wonderful, and really, really exciting, because doing all of this from a distance, it's exciting in its own way, but it's not as exciting as the real thing.
And Vlad and Sekai?
Yeah, I think for me, definitely. I mean, first of all, I think just doing this and learning how to use this software is very relevant to kind of my own kind of research around technologies and queerness and performance and so on. But I think, as Sasha was saying, you know, I've been left with this wonderful body of work. And it's not just the poetry. I think watching Sasha's video today, it was, you know, this realization of Edwin Morgan, the visual artist, that kind of gives a different spin to the poetry. It makes it a lot more physical in many ways and a lot more visual. And I think that will definitely stay with me going forward.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to stay with me for a long time, because, you know, in a way, I've really integrated this project into my practice in general, and I'm learning, you know, Shauna, and I'm engaging with like the certain things that I was already planning on engaging with, but in a much more kind of like much more kind of deep way. And I think that the big thing is having a writer that I can like refer to as well when I'm thinking about, you know, writing, or I'm thinking about poetry, someone who I know is always going to give me like something, you know. I love that Centenary book. Like I just like flip through it all the time and just find something new every time. So yeah.
That's so great. The next question is, what is your favorite Morgan poem that you've read? And I don't know if we've got time for me to spring a reading on you, but for anybody listening, you can access all of the poems in the Centenary publications, but on our website we've also got amazing readings of Edwin Morgan poems, from the Open the Doors video that was the first one, the Christmas video that we released, the Concrete World of Edwin Morgan. So please go and explore those videos if you would like to hear some beautiful readings of Morgan. But if you're able to just quickly say what, if you have a favorite poem that you've encountered, that would be amazing.
Can I say a favorite line? Yes, the one that speaks most to me, hold hands among the atoms. It's pretty cosmic and rather wonderful.
That's great. That's why we named our digital Centenary program with that. It felt very fitting at this point in time. Morgan seemed to provide us with so much material, even though he's been gone for 10 years. It's sort of this amazing gift that keeps giving. And Vlad and Sekai?
I'll go. Mine is the Starlings in George Square. I absolutely love this poem. I've read it over and over and over again. I'm not going to read it this time because I feel like I've already done enough poetry tonight. But I just absolutely, like, I'm obsessed with it. And I don't know, I just keep going back to it because I really love starlings in general. So kind of thinking about them like in their murmurations and then reading the poems has been really lovely.
I'm so tempted to ask you to read it because you read the other one so well, but I'm going to hold back.
It's also really funny. Like, it's like both like a beautiful poem and another example of one of his really funny ones.
And Vlad?
For me, it's particle poem 3. It's the one that goes, 3 particles lived in mystical union. They made knife, fork, and spoon, and earth, sea, and sky. I think it's quite a beautiful imaginary.
I love that one too. It's been really nice because my journey of discovering Edwin Morgan has also been in parallel to this centenary. So I feel like I've been able to find joy from your discovery in the same sort of way and freshness, which has been super nice. So we've got another question. How can we maintain this wide access to cultural experiences and art post-lockdown? It's a big one and maybe not one for you all to answer, but I guess maybe what you would love to see stay.
Definitely. We've made the most incredible strides in terms of accessibility and inclusiveness in the arts. It's been forced on a lot of organisations, but just because it's been imposed, by external constraints, doesn't mean that once those constraints go, that we just go back to what we had before. I mean, for many disabled people, normal never worked for us. So I think it's incumbent on everybody in the creative sector, everybody in the arts, to actually try and hold on to the gains that we've made, and not just passively go, oh yeah, let's go back to doing things how they were, because how we used to do things excluded a lot of people.
And Sekai, what would be the one element that's happened over this period that you would love to see stay?
There's a few things. I really enjoy being able to, meet people and talk to people from all around the world without any of those constraints that we used to have. I definitely think the accessibility thing is a huge, huge, huge aspect that has to stay. And it's ridiculous that it's taken such a big, crisis for that to become the norm. But also just thinking about how we can start to connect with people from all around the world in the ways that we have access, because we have access to through the technology that we have. We just weren't using it to its like full capacity. And also just like not going for like meetings that last for half an hour and having to take a 2-hour train ride. It's just silly. Just the kind of the practical day-to-day stuff, like for everyone to not have to do that, it would be good. But also like in terms of this, to relate back to the project, I definitely think that inviting people from lots of different backgrounds with lots of different perspectives and different lived experiences to engage with projects that relate to any subject or that are made to celebrate the work of great people from any place or any time. That's really important. We shouldn't be pigeonholing people to like, you work on this because this is what your identity says you're supposed to think about or care about. So yeah, it's a lot of things.
No, it's good. And Vlad was...
Yeah, I think I can echo what's been said already. I think particularly in theater, from as far as I know, this question of widened access has really been brought to the front, and of course, in many ways, theater is a physical and embodied medium, but it does not always have to be. And perhaps there's room for digital to bring theater beyond the traditional centers of Inverness, Dundee, Edinburgh, Glasgow. Again, I'm not saying it should be a replacement, but I think it can be something that can be used alongside other forms of presentation as well.
And this is the last question that I have, and we've only got a few minutes left, so it's good timing. And this is another sort of general one to all of you. And maybe, again, it could be a hot takes answer rather than needing to go into it in full. But the question is, what advice would you give to other artists who want to develop their work that is inspired by literature or the written word? Is there anyone who's like ready with some banging tips, or?
I think I would just take Sasha's lead on not having, if there's something else you can engage with, if the reading part is difficult for whatever reason, then try and find that other thing to be your linchpin. Because for me, yeah, the translation actually was another reason. Like I'm neurodiverse, so it's hard for me to sit and read for hours and hours on end. And I've been able to luckily like flip through the books and just read some quick poems, but like I can't read for long periods of time. So I think that it's important for people to be able to kind of try and find something else about that person or about the project that you can like find as a point of entry.
I think I'd say just don't be overwhelmed by it. Just because someone is cool and famous and everything, that's not to say that you can't take something from their work and actually sort of really go with it. There's always some fragment to actually inspire you. So just do it. Don't be put off by the fact that someone has got a smart agent and a big house. Just go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really think I have anything to add to that. I think, engage with it and make it your own and find your access point into it. And
yeah, perfect. I think that's a really beautiful note to end on. I think we, again, over the next, so the Edwin Morgan Centenary will continue until April 27, and over the next couple of months, we've got heaps of digital programming that will be happening. And in addition to that, these 20 projects from the Second Life, which are as wild and incredible as these 3 projects, as well as Gaelic translations of love poems, traditional Scottish dance choreography, a harp score in response to Morgan, visual poems, an animated website that takes you through Morgan. So there's going to be a burst of new Morgan responses. So I'd encourage everyone to visit the website and to sign up to the e-news and to keep checking as things come out, and to enjoy and soak up as much of the Edwin Morgan Centenary as you can over the next little while, and also access the videos that already exist. I think we've got about 14 videos on the website that engage with Edwin Morgan as a queer poet, engage with Edwin Morgan as a writer, engage with Edwin Morgan in Glasgow, engage with new voices. So some of the amazing poets that have been recipients of the Edwin Morgan Poetry Award over the past years. So there's a plethora of material, and you can take it, even if you're not a commissioned artist from the Second Life, you can take it and use it as a launch pad to access your own creativity and to get something happening, which has been such a joy to watch you all be so enthusiastic and generous, and the amazing cultural advisors who have been able to really start that process by using their tentacles and embedded knowledge to be able to access these really inspiring voices. So thank you so much. I feel very, very lucky, and I know the Trust and any fan of Edwin Morgan would be over the moon with the ways that you've approached this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Paisley.
Mm.